Hey everybody, it is Wendigoon again. It is very windy outside, but I wanted to go ahead and do another Sunday study. A lot of people seem to like the last one, and that really means a lot. I appreciate it, and I'll just keep on keeping on. So for this week, I wanted to talk about David, and specifically David's big sin he committed. So David, and also for reading the story in the vacuum, I want it to be understood that David was in no way what you would consider a bad guy. He just did a really bad thing. I think a lot of us, if we were judged by our individual actions, would come off as much worse as we are, which again is the reason we're all sinners. But it's important to look at a person in the whole, especially Bible characters when evaluating their worth. So I don't want anyone who doesn't know anything else about David to hear this and just assume that he's a horrible, awful person. He was the anointed man of God, and it's even said a man after God's own heart. But this is specifically his one mess up, and I want to look at it and what can be gleaned from it. So at this point, for those that watched last week's, Saul has been dead a while, and David has been king for quite a long time, to the point that he has his palace and his empire, and all of that going well. He has his armies fighting his wars for him. Everything seems to be fine until this happens. So I'm in 2 Samuel chapter 11, starting with verse 1. And it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. Joab, for context, was sort of David's second in command, or kind of like his chief general. And his servants with him and all Israel. And they destroyed the city of Ammon and besieged Rabbah, but David tarried still at Jerusalem. So you hear the saying a lot, especially preachers will say stuff like idle hands are the devil's workshop, and that cannot be more true than in this case. David should be out fighting the battles in his conquest, but this year, for whatever reason, he decided to stay home. And from that, we see the first seed being planted. And it came to pass in an eventide that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, "Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" So for context here, it was commonplace with the way old houses were set up, back in Bible times, that they would bathe themselves on the roof, because it makes sense if you're going to have water going everywhere to be on a roof. And also, every house was one story. So I kind of want to disprove something a lot of people think. A lot of people kind of enter the story with, oh, well, Bathsheba, the lady who was bathed on the roof, was asking for it. That's just how people bathe. It wasn't her fault that the king's palace was super high and that from walking around David could see her. But nonetheless, David saw her. Now, it's going to get into it in a second, but Uriah, the husband of this woman, was one of David's chief generals. And David sent messengers and took her, and she came in unto him. And he lay with her, for she was purified from her uncleanliness, and she returned unto her house. So he sees this woman down there. He asks who the wife is, and they say, "Oh, it's your chief general." Well, lucky for David, all the generals are out fighting his wars that, mind you, he's supposed to be at right now. So he brings her in, he sleeps with her, and then he sends her back her way. So he committed a sin, something very wrong. He had adultery with another man's wife. Now, at the time, marriage was different than what it is now. This was before God ordained marriage, as it is today. At the time, it was just sort of a repopulating method. So the king, it was common to have several wives. However, the difference was you could not take another man's wife. And especially, in social constructs, one of your generals who directly works under you. So David's sin here was he took the wife of another man and slept with her. So then this happens. And the woman conceived and sent and told David and said, "I am with child." Oh no. And David sent to Joab, saying, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent Uriah to David. So now he's in trouble. The woman that, thank you, Cloud. The woman that he slept with, who again is married to one of his generals, is now pregnant. So he panics and he tells the second in command, Joab, to send Uriah back home. And when Uriah was come unto him, David demanded of him how Joab did, and how the people did, and how the war prospered. And David said to Uriah, Go down to thy house and wash thy feet. And Uriah departed out of the king's house, and there followed him a mess of meat from the king. So David's plan is, oh no, she's pregnant. If I can have her husband come back and then say, go down, be at your house. Then when it comes out that she's pregnant, everyone's just going to assume it's because of that time that her husband came over, and he'll probably even assume that. So no harm, no foul. So he sends him on his way, but then this happens. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and went not down to his house. And when they had told David, saying, Uriah went not down into his house, David said unto Uriah, Camest thou not from thy journey? When then didst thou not go down into thine house? And Uriah said to David, The ark and Israel and Judah abide in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in open fields. Shall I then go into mine house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As thou livest and as thy soul liveth, I will not do this thing. People talk about this story from David and Bathsheba's perspective, which I'm also doing, and it's understandable looking at the sin. But I think Uriah is one of the most underrated characters in all of the Bible. We see here a man so faithful to his people, to his soldiers, to his army, to the Ark of the Covenant that he talks about, that he gets brought in by the king. If there was ever someone who would relieve you from your duties, it would be the king. But because his men and Joab and all the others are in the field fighting a war, he slept on the palace steps and said, How could I go and lie with my wife when my men are encamped in the fields, as he says? Which is a bravery and boldness it's so amazing to see. I think Uriah needs to be looked at as an example, and as we'll get into, of what valiant men are. However, this is a problem for David, because now his plan's not working. Originally, it was just simple. Uriah goes down to be with his wife. Oh, she's pregnant? That makes sense. And then that'd be the end of it. But now he's not going to be with his wife. So, David messes up again. Something you'll see a lot in a biblical circle, any circle really, is this concept of one sin leads to another. And it keeps building up and up and up. And we are already starting to see the steps. So, he sleeps with a woman. He has a general brought in, lies to him about why. And then we're about to see a big jump. And David said to Uriah, Tarry here today also, and tomorrow I will let thee depart. So Uriah abode in Jerusalem that day and the morrow. And when David had called him, he did eat and drink before him, and he made him drunk. And at even he went out to lie on his bed with the servants of his lord, but went down not to his house. So he has Uriah come in, and he starts trying to get him drunk. So that way he's like, okay, if I get him drunk, he will go back to his house and sleep with his wife, and everything will be okay. But even when drunk, it says he went and lied on the bed with the servants. Still wouldn't do it. So we now see David taking drastic measures. Also, I want to say the part about the eating and drinking, I think he was trying to get him drunk, but I feel like there was a part, especially because David knew God. David was very close with God. He understood the consequences of actions, but he felt stuck in this. And I think in that time that David was with Uriah, he was trying to talk himself out of it, that he wouldn't move on to the next step. But yep, here we are. So in verse 14 it says, And it came to pass in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab, second in command, and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter, saying, Set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. And it came to pass, when Joab observed the city, that he assigned Uriah unto a place where he knew the valiant men were. And the men of the city went out and fought with Joab, and there fell some of the people of the servants of David, and Uriah the Hittite died also. So there's a lot to glean here in these 4 verses. I think the first thing I want to point out, looking at Uriah's valiant nature, David wrote a letter to Joab saying, make sure Uriah dies in battle. And Uriah carried that letter to Joab and never looked at it. Or at least as far as we're told, never looked at it. And I don't believe so, because Right after, we see that he's assigned to the front, and it never says anything about him resisting. There's never a line mention of he protested or he said, no, if I go there, that battle's hot, I'll die. He went where his king told him to go. So, just the valiant. This is a man to look after when it comes to what honor is. And to carry the letter that has your death certificate in it. And then when that man opens the letter and tells you you're going to the worst part to go. Not only that, but something I love about, I'm not knocking any other translations for their legitimacy as far as scripture goes or something like that. But the reason that I personally like to read out of the King James Version is a lot of the poetry that's in it. And the wording of this phrase, he assigned Uriah, it says, David said, put him in the hottest battle where the fighting's the worst. It says he was assigned Uriah to a place where he knew the valiant men were. Where was the battle the worst? Where the valiant men were. It's just beautiful language like that I really appreciate. So, David's plan works out. According to, as far as David sees, Uriah went out to battle and died. No one's going to question a soldier dying in battle. It's all part of the plan, right? So Uriah dies in battle. And now, David can take Bathsheba to be his wife because her husband's dead. So she's able to be. So he comes to her. Everyone assumes the child came from afterwards. And everything's good from David's side. It even says, I'm skipping ahead a bit. Let's see. Thou shalt, David's reply to Joab, my bad. I'm fighting the wind here with some of these pages. So I'm skipping ahead to verse 26 of chapter 11. And when the wife of Uriah, Bathsheba, heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. And when the morning was past, David sent and fetched her to his house, and she became his wife and bare him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Because remember, and this is one of the most important things to glean from this story, in the eyes of man, David got away with it. He pulled everything off perfectly. He brought the general back, and when he tried to do it one way, he said, fine, I'll have him killed in battle. He dies, she can be my wife. Everything worked out, at least from his side. Did he want to kill Uriah? Probably not, but he still did. However, God knew what he did. In the story I talked about last week, I talked about Samuel. Samuel was the first prophet, the one who would be the mouthpiece for God, essentially, to kings and leaders in Israel itself. Well, now we meet the second prophet of the timeline. Remember, Samuel died back in the age of Saul, so now we're talking about the second mentioned prophet, and that is a man named Nathan. So, it says, starting in chapter 12, verse 1, and the Lord, 2 Samuel again, by the way, 2 Samuel 12, verse 1. And the Lord sent Nathan unto David, and he came unto him and said unto him. So, the Lord knows what David did, so he tells Nathan to go and essentially call out David for his sins. And this is what Nathan does. Goes, imagine this, he's in the king's chamber, standing before the king, and he says this. There were two men in one city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceeding many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing save one little lamb, which he had bought and nourished up, and it grew up together with him and with his children. It did eat of his own meat and drank of his own cup, and lay in his bosom, and was unto him as a daughter. And there came a traveler unto the rich man, and he spared to take of his own flock and of his own herd, to dress for the wayfaring man that was come unto him, but took the poor man's lamb, and dressed it for the man that was come to him. And David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said to Nathan, As the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this thing shall surely die. And he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity. The prophet walks into the king in his house. It says there's two men in the city, a poor and a rich man. The rich man had flocks of lambs, but the poor man only had one, and he loved that lamb. So whenever a traveler came and he needed to eat, he asked the rich man for a lamb, but the rich man wouldn't give him any of his. Instead, he killed the poor man's lamb, fed it to the traveler. You can see where this is going. And it said David became furious, and he jumps up and he goes, where is he? We will kill this rich man, and we will give his lambs to the poor man. David not recognizing the mirror that's being placed in front of him. And Nathan said to David, thou art the man. Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel, and I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul. And I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would moreover have given unto thee such and such things. Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord, to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take the wives before thine eyes, and I will give them unto thy neighbor. And he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of the sun. For thou did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. So, we have another prophet calling out a king, possibly in a more theatrical way than Samuel. But David says, where is this man who's done this thing? And he points at the king and says, thou art the man. And he tells him straight up that this thing that you've done, that most horrible thing, because you know what you did and God know what you did. You've killed a man to take his wife. You took the lamb. And I absolutely love that thing, because remember, Nathan is working as God's mouthpiece. He is speaking the voice of God. And he says, God gave you wives and riches and kings and kingdoms. He saved your life from Saul. David knew better to what he was doing. He says he's done all of that, and if that had been too little, he would have given you more. I absolutely love that phrasing, because I think that's something we all run into. We are so easy to forget about how much we've been given. Like, to look around, and I understand some people's situations are worse than others, but to look around and realize your health, or your family, or your condition, or your home, and then to look at someone else who doesn't have it. But we get so down in our own dumps about one thing, or one or two things, that just absolutely consume us. But as God said, if that had been too little, he would have given you more. And David did that exact thing. He had all these lambs. He had so many wives and palaces. He had a kingdom with men fighting wars for him. But he saw one woman, and he just couldn't resist. Had to go with that. So his punishment immediately afterwards too, I want to mention, we see David break down and absolutely lose himself. He realizes his sin. He realizes his treachery. And the child that he had with Bathsheba would one day die because of his sin in this situation. And not only that, but what that thing that Nathan talked about at the end, where what you've done in private, your punishment will be public. After this, all of David's wives became essentially whores, so to speak. They began to follow desires of their heart. It was as if this blessing that God had put on him with his wives who all loved him and cared for him, that blessing had been taken off, and they started to catch eyes for other men. To the point that all of Israel knew that David's wives got around. And his punishment was made public because of something he'd done in private. And I also think a lot of us can relate to stuff like that. But David learned from it. Whereas Saul continuously messed up over and over and over again. This was David's big mess up, but he came back and was better for it. But if it hadn't been for another man of God to stand before a king once again and say, you have done this thing wrong, this is not what God would have asked, then David wouldn't have learned. And who knows where he would have ended up? Who knows where the story could have gone? There could have been another David that roused up, just like how David was another Saul. God may have had Nathan appoint another one, or anoint another one, I should say. But that didn't have to happen because David learned. And he walked in God his life, especially when David comes to the end of his life. The Bible talks about how gracious and good of a man his heart was. But he had this mess up, he was punished for it, but he learned from it. So I wanted to share this story both as a way so that we could, one, count our blessings, even if we forget them sometimes. That was kind of a cliche phrase, but you know what I mean. And to understand the courage of men like Nathan to stand before kings and to say what's right and do what's right, and the valor of men like Uriah, who he got the shaft in a bad way, but his legacy lives on as such a great and valiant man. So thank you all for listening. It really does mean a lot. I forgot the patron list again. Hold up. I know I can do. Well, I don't want to try to do it, because if I try to do it and forget someone, I'm going to feel really bad. I know we got Benjamin Allen, Tim Freelove, Pef, Kayla, Eddie Shoemaker, and there's one more. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Okay, whoever I forgot, your name will be top of the description with hearts. I love you so much. No, there's two I forgot because there's another Huntsman. Okay, both of you are going to be in the description with hearts if I didn't say your name. I'm so sorry. I need to have the list. I just did this spur of the moment and forgot, my bad. But really, everyone, thank you all for watching. It means a lot. So that's it. There will be the short film coming this week. Hopefully you enjoy that. And that is all. So thank you, boys, and I will talk to you later.